With the rise of AI generated content, I actually do think that video and podcasting are rising in quality and authenticity because there you can't AI your way out of it, right? Like you're live with an interviewer, you're live with a podcast host. You can't rely on ChatGPT to give you the answer.
Hello and welcome to the HealthTech Marketing Show. I'm your host, Adam Chirinas. I'm the CEO of Health Launchpad. We're one of the sponsors of this show. And I want to give a big thank you to you for listening and a big thank you to our co-sponsors in the show, the wonderful people from HIMSS who've sponsored this show since the very start. So today's episode is all about thought leadership. And it's quite a long episode, and that's because we're going to go really deep on this subject. So what we're going to talk about is the evolution of thought leadership, how it's changing. We're going to get into where the lines are blurry between paid and earned media. We're also going to talk a lot about best practices, in particular video. And we can't do a podcast these days without talking about AI, and AI is having a big impact on thought leadership. So we're going to get into that. It's super practical. And to help me on this topic, I've got two great guests. I have the amazing Colin Hung from Sway Health, who just is a font of knowledge on thought leadership and a really thoughtful guy. And then I also have my wonderful colleague, Lea Chatham, who is a real expert in this topic. So with that, on to the show. So Colin and Lea, welcome to the show. I'm so delighted you're here. Why don't we start off with a quick intro? Colin, tell us about yourself and help us set the table here with what's your definition of thought leadership?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you. Great to be here. I am the editor-in-chief at Sway Health, which is a publication dedicated to healthcare marketing. I'm also a professional conference attendee. And yeah, I think, thought leadership is so interesting. It's changed over the years, at least in terms of the mediums that we deliver it in. But to me, thought leadership has always been about the ability to influence and drive action. That could be, in a business context, a click, or a book a demo, or it could be to create action more broadly in the sense of to move something forward through the use of ideas, expertise, commentary, and opinion.
I love that. Nice, simple definition. Great, nice and clear. Lea, tell us about yourself and tell us a bit about how thought leadership what role it's played in your career.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Lea Chatham and I'm the content and brand strategist at Health Launchpad. And I've been in what we today call content marketing my entire career. But that actually means I started back in, 25 years ago as a copywriter. So actually thought leadership has always played a pretty big role because a lot of what I was doing early on when I was working at Medical Manager Health Systems back in the day was print newsletters and sponsored inserts in magazines. In fact, somewhere around here, I was just cleaning out and found an award from Healthcare Informatics for one of our inserted sponsored sort of sections, which it used to be in a magazine, you'd have what would be like several pages, right, of articles and content you'd developed. And so I think, like Colin said, thought leadership has really evolved. But for those of us who've been in content marketing and brand marketing, it's always been there in some form. And a lot of it is that kind of content that is educational, informational, providing insights or cutting edge data and research and all those kinds of things. And I've been doing that in various forms and adapting over time for about 25 years now. And I think it's become even more critical today as we try to target people based on really very specifically who they are, to be very thoughtful about your thought leadership content, how you talk, what you say, where you put it, all those things.
Is there any examples of thought leadership where you're most proud of?
Yes, actually. And it does go back a ways, but when I was working for Cario, which is now Tebra, we were building out, ramping up in a very big way, outsourced billing services. And, it was a billing and practice management platform. And ICD-10 at the time was really one of the biggest challenges potentially facing, especially small practices, right, coming in. We put together a massive microsite of information. We had assessments, we had an expert write a ton of educational material. We prepped a webinar that was supposed to launch the week of ICD-10. We kept putting it off because they kept delaying it month after month. And then finally we said, we're just going to do it. And because we had such great content and these amazing interactive assessments and all this stuff, and we lucked into, they pushed go on the launch the day that we had finally said we were just going to do the webinar. And we managed to get 2,000 or 2,500 people had registered and almost 1,000 people showed up. It was one of the most successful things we ever did.
Extraordinary.
And we had these really great experts on. I mean, it was one of those, everything came together so perfectly. The timing, the amount and type of content, the experts who were available to work with us on it and be on the webinar. And it was just, it lived for years. I mean, it was sort of became an expert source of content for people that thousands of people kept coming back to that microsite over and over again.
I love that example because I think a lot of folks, if you say thought leadership, you immediately think about maybe a kind of a turgid 40-page white paper. But what you just described there is just a sort of an evergreen resource that sort of like becomes like, sort of like a leading resource for ICD-10. Now, Colin, you're, in the business that you run with John and Brittany, you guys are all about content all the time. You produce content, which is phenomenal content, both for health tech marketers, for people marketing to patients, and then, of course, for the healthcare technology industry overall. You also have people writing stuff for you. So I'm just really curious, is like, when you sort of think about the last 4 or 5 years, what do you see as like the big shifts that are going on in thought leadership?
Well, like I mentioned off the top, I think one of the biggest shifts in thought leadership is the mediums in which thought leadership is now shared, right? Like before, it was written word, it was seminars, in-person seminars, it was sessions at conferences, being on the speaking circuit. Those are still valid. But those are more traditional now, right? Now we have social media, we have YouTube, we have TikTok, we have Instagram, we have LinkedIn, and we have and then we have podcasts galore, right? These didn't exist a few years ago. So I think the amount of channels, the number of channels, the breadth of channels has definitely changed the game, and it's lowered the barrier. I think before there was kind of a high barrier to entry when it came to thought leadership because there were only so many dailies and news outlets that you could go to. Now there are dozens and dozens of podcasters you could choose to get your message out there, right? So I think that has changed for sure in terms of the ways you can get your thought leadership out there. And I think because of it, we're seeing more people because there's bound to be at least one medium where someone is comfortable. Right? There's bound to be one medium where I like the written word, so I'll continue to blog, or I prefer to be on video and I'll start doing video podcasts with people and so forth. So I think that has really changed.
That's a really interesting notion, which is, do you find that there are some marketers and marketing organizations that say, we're just going to focus on this particular medium and we're not going to bother with other ones?
I'm not sure if they consciously I think some make that conscious decision. I think most do it by trial and error. They'll get their executive to try all the mediums. And then, much like all of us, like there are some that they excel at and some of that will be pretty bad at. And I think they'll just gravitate towards the ones where they feel most comfortable. I've seen people who are amazing on podcasts who can't do a video. Right. And vice versa. People who do amazing on video, but don't find that they're very good writers. So I think it's okay not to be masters of all of those mediums. I think it's okay to focus on ones that you feel where your audience is, and B, where the subject matter expert is comfortable. I think both of those are important factors.
I think it's interesting because with Health Launchpad, I've been doing the podcast in various forms for about 2 or 3 years now. And I kind of, a couple of times I sort of put it on the back burner a bit. And then I was doing it intermittently. So maybe doing one every month or so. And I actually stopped it for quite a while. And most of the thought leadership that we were doing as a company was written specifically to sort of about particular topics. And frankly, to try and dominate certain keywords. It's very effective in that regard. But I decided about a year or so ago that I was going to go all in back on the podcast. And that podcast is now actually at the center of what we do. And so now the blog posts and a lot of the stuff around the blog posts and the social media posts focus on a topic that comes out of the podcast. And as you know, we run this group called HealthTech Marketing Network. And what we did was we got the network to pick the topics that we were going to focus on and then calendarize that for the year. And that then became our schedule. And that's sort of the schedule for the podcast as well. So it's sort of interesting how it can kind of shift around, but you've got to kind of pick a medium to say, I'm going to focus on that one and then emanate out from that.
Well, and the other channel, and we can explore that too. It is the blurring of lines between earned media and paid media. And I think this is really because of the rise of influencers, right? Influencers have established trust with their audiences. And whether or not they do a paid versus a non-paid video or an article or any kind of content, I think you'd be hard pressed to know the difference between the two in terms of its impact, right? Because that influencer has already built up this massive amount of trust. The fact that one video versus another is sponsored, I mean, it makes a small difference, I think, but not as big as it used to be. And on top of that, I think companies, organizations have gotten so much better at their sponsored content. It does not look like an ad anymore. It is not a written testimonial anymore. And so it's much harder to tell when something is sponsored versus not. So I think that we definitely see that in our business.
Are there any examples that you can share of that? The concept makes sense, but I'm just kind of hard thinking of specifics.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of specific things that happen now. So, for example, if you have a doctor on staff, they're your chief medical officer at a healthcare vendor, they will typically speak on issues and things that are relevant to clinicians, right? Clinician burnout, usability of technology, and so forth. It's not specific to your product necessarily. And so what some companies will do is they'll pay to have interviews done of their CMO on a particular topic, not necessarily highlighting the new product release that they're doing, but just in general, just to remain relevant. And so you think about that kind of paid content, you go, well, it's paid for because that company did sponsor this interview, but the topic is not company specific. And so when that gets published on our sites, when that gets pushed out there, I would think you would be hard pressed to, if you didn't see that sponsored label on it, you'd be hard pressed to know that this was a sponsored piece because it's just talking about the state of physician burnout right now. And so that's an example I would give of how the line has gotten so blurry, because I think companies, advertisers have gotten so much more savvy in terms of knowing what resonates with their audience. And they know that a straight up sales pitch doesn't resonate.
Yes. Yeah. I'm thinking about publications, and I hope I'm not saying the wrong thing here, but as I understand it, Becker's is pay for play only. So don't pitch us as a PR article. So if you want to place an article, we'll take the article. You just have to pay for it. I don't know if they do non-paid as well, to be honest.
They do some. It sort of depends if it really is truly newsworthy. So you can send releases to them, right? If it's really newsworthy, they'll take it. But if you're really trying to get more thought leadership type content in there versus something that really feels very newsworthy in terms of something that's happening in the industry, generally it's something that you need to pay for. But I think the advantage of that is that you're getting all that additional promotion, right? So they do, and I would say the same of Colin and John with Sway and Healthcare IT Today, or the amazing group that does Health System CIO, right? I mean, there's a lot of publications out there that are very careful to make sure that it is really quality content and to present it in a way that feels like quality content. But what you're paying for is that additional marketing and support that you're getting from them, right? To get it out there. That is really valuable. It's nice to have earned content and get things out there for free, but that's getting harder and harder. And generally a lot of these groups and publications that now are feeling like they need to charge to stay in business for these things are doing a very good job of making sure it's good quality content and then giving you as the marketer some benefit, right, in terms of getting it out there in front of people.
And what's the how does that change the expectation on measurement? So, I mean, if you pitch an article to Healthcare IT News and Bill Sawicki writes a case study on it, if you say you can't then follow up with Bill Sawicki or anybody at HIT, at HIMSS and say, hey, well, how many people read the article? That's right. If you're paying for placement, how does that change the expectation in terms of measurement?
Well, I can tell you my thoughts on that. Colin, I was going to say, Colin, do you want to share some of your what you give people in terms of?
Yeah, I'll share first. So when it's paid, there's a couple of things that happen that wouldn't normally happen on an earned media piece. First of all, when we know it's paid, we collaborate much more closely with whoever's paying on the questions, the topics, the thrust of the article. And then we'll push them, obviously, because that's who we are, to make sure that whatever story we come up with is valuable for the audience, our audience, because we know them very well. And then, yes, we share the assets that are created based on what it is. So, for example, when we do a video interview, we'll share the footage with the company because they paid for it. And so they are free. They have the shared rights along with us to then cut it up and maybe do a 1-minute clip version of it that they can put on their website or that they can share on their social media and so forth. So you get a few extra things in addition to the big one, which Lea highlighted, which is you get more promotion. Because it's a paid piece, we tend to promote it a little bit longer, a little bit harder in our newsletters, in social media, and those kinds of things. So you get all of that, and that sort of sets some different expectations in terms of viewers and clicks and brand awareness.
And how do you report back on the metrics?
Yeah, so we literally do it in a spreadsheet back to so you get a sheet with here's how many views it got, here's how many downloads of the podcast, here's how many click-throughs on the links that happen to be in the article that we had. So you get all of those metrics from us when it's a paid piece.
Yeah. And depending on who you're working with, for some of the more expensive types of content syndication and things like that, you're often getting some kind of lead guarantee as well. So, if you're doing a content syndication with a publication, might be something in, the MJH Life Sciences group, like Physicians Practice or Medical Economics, or it might be Becker's, or might be Modern Healthcare, or anybody else. If it is more along those lines where they're doing a form promoting it and there's a white paper or there's a checklist or a case study, or you're doing a live event like this where you're presenting, new data and content and things like that, you generally have some kind of minimum lead guarantee and they'll continue to push it out and promote it until you meet that. So I think that's one of the big differences is in some of those, you are getting lead guarantees. In other ones, it may be more like Colin's saying, where it's an article or a video, and you're getting more of the sort of impressions and referral traffic and things like that you're kind of tracking and measuring.
Lea, I mean, when you've been in the marketing seat, how did you manage the expectations of the people around you, particularly maybe the CEO, in terms of that this is different now?
Yeah, I always have sort of said it's really important to think about, like, we're trying to get earned media. We're trying to get people to write articles and interview us and do those kinds of things, but not to ever kind of balk or say no when somebody comes back and says, hey, we don't have the bandwidth right now to do an article, but this topic is interesting. If you guys want to write a byline, or if you want to do this paid opportunity over here, these are some other options for you. My goal was always, are we getting enough things in the right places? Like, let's not think about it so much as, oh, we only want the earned traffic. Our goal is a specific kind of number of touches in different publications and associations and podcasts and all these things. So what is the mix there that we need to do that? Maybe that mix is we need to be on one of the Forbes councils and pay that $5,000 a year. Maybe it's we need to work with Colin and John at Healthcare IT Today to do their packages for health and HIMSS to make sure we've got some interviews there, and then work on that earned piece with our PR firm, right? You're just talking about it as a balance of getting enough means you need to budget some money for some paid stuff, right? You need to do your own things where you're hosting a webinar, you're writing your own blog and those things, and then work hard on trying to get what earned you can. But just to be realistic, that very rarely can people generate all that thought leadership, awareness, and engagement off of earned. I mean, it's just not a realistic expectation, especially the last couple of years. I think it's really shifted more towards you got to be willing to write the bylines yourself or pay to get them placed.
Has that, is this shift and the blurring of the lines here, maybe a shift in the balance towards paid? Has there been a change in the authenticity of thought leadership? Is it still as credible as it used to be?
That's an interesting question, multi-layered question, Adam. I will say a couple of things. One, with the rise of AI-generated content, I actually do think that video and podcasting are rising in quality and authenticity, because there you can't AI your way out of it, right? Like you're live with an interviewer, you're live with a podcast host. You can't rely on ChatGPT to give you the answer if that's what you were doing, right? So because I think there will be some people who sound brilliant written, because that is what ChatGPT generates, but who cannot mimic that live, or who may not be as good live. So I think being on camera, being on a podcast actually has some extra authenticity now because of AI and the written word. Not to say the written word's bad, but just in general, I think that's true. I also think that, again, it goes back to who it is and what publication it is where the content is being distributed through. I think there are trusted names. You've listed many here, right? Becker's, Healthcare IT News, all the MJH properties. People trust those publications. So when there is paid versus earned there, I don't think people treat the paid, I don't think they look down on it, in other words. However, if it's a relatively unknown media outlet or a new one, that may be a bit more challenging. Where if, because you just don't have the reputation yet. So I think those two play a bigger role in determining authenticity. It's actually more the outlet itself and the medium, as opposed to whether it's paid or not.
It's very interesting. Yeah. It's funny, as you were saying that, you said that about podcasts. I was thinking about an AI experiment I did the other day. So I use one of my favorite AI tools is something called Notebook LM. And what it allows you to do is sort of take a lot of different content that's in your control and and then interrogate that content. So for example, I had sort of 20, 30 hours of 1 hour meetings with dozens of health tech marketing people as part of the Health Tech Marketing Network over a course of a year, covering a whole bunch of different issues. And what I do is I then put this into a big folder in Notebook, and then I'll interrogate it. And so I was asking it a question about the shift, I think, from lead volume to quality. I think that was probably what the topic was. And it came up with, I asked a series of questions, and it came up with a really interesting point of view that it then says, would you like to create a podcast out of this? I thought, I'll bite. And you click that. Shows you way, not for that long, 5 minutes. And it created this podcast between a man and a woman talking about this. There's definitely some chemistry going on there. Like, I don't know what's happening after the podcast, but I think they were going out for cocktails. But it was so unauthentic and forced. I mean, it was like an infomercial. It was cringe-worthy. 100%, Colin. I think that with AI, if you train applications like Claude enough, you can get them to the point where it can write something which is, that actually feels like it's in my own voice. But you can't really do that with podcasts and video. Not yet.
And I would add that, there's a storytelling. This, I think, is what comes up a lot of times when we're talking about using AI for content marketing. There's a storytelling piece and a creativity piece. And I'm thinking about our recent conversation about infographics and how much time I put into this infographic recently. And I thought, he's going to think that's so much time because I could have used more AI. But ultimately, to tell the story and be able to have these little sections and sort of make it flow really well. And then you look at it and go, well, now I've got to switch out these couple of stats because they don't quite work with the way the story's flowing. And then you're going back. And it is a really nuanced, skill-based thing to be able in something like a long infographic to tell a story that feels like it flows really well in the way you think your buyer is thinking, right? And to go through this process. And I think what makes it authentic, to Colin's point, is people can tell really when the storytelling is very good and when you're really, capitalizing on the information and resources and insights and opinions that are meant for them. So you can go on a podcast and maybe you are paying for it, but it's if you as the person are clearly authentic and educated and have a point of view, that definitely comes across wherever you are. Yeah.
I think somebody as skilled as you both can tell when it's the AI. In fact, I was talking to one of our colleagues recently about a writer we were trying out, and this person had written a case study, and the person who was reviewing it said, they could tell that they used ChatGPT to do it, and there was no story, there was no nuance to it. So, I mean, just on the notion of kind of nuance and what makes sort of good content, I remember when we were kind of preparing for this, that Colin, you had some points of view about being a bit contrarian, about things sort of like particular techniques to make something really stand out.
Yeah, this is true, before AI, and it's going to be true in the era of AI. There is something to be said about not going with the herd, right? I'm not saying express an opinion, a contrary opinion, just for the sake of expressing a contrary opinion, but to tell maybe an aspect of the story that isn't being told. And I think it adds that freshness that we all crave. Like, we are inundated with media sources these days, right? Like, you've got YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, you've got blogs, you've got Twitter, well, not Twitter anymore, but X, you've got all these channels. And so when we're all saying the same thing, like the example I used recently was, healthcare sucks at cybersecurity. Like, that's pretty much the message from every article you read, every video you see. It's like, we're terrible at it. We're a soft target. We have tons of breaches. We have that wall of shame. We get it, right? Like, it's been told many, many times. So when I was going to do another interview with a cybersecurity tech CEO who I had interviewed before and had gotten to know a little bit, I kind of asked him, I said, listen, if you're willing to dare it, I would love to tell this story is the reverse. Instead of talking about how we're all so bad and doing yet another video on that, can I ask you, what are we doing well? What should healthcare actually pat ourselves on the back and go, we're actually doing this pretty good now in terms of cybersecurity? And he actually had to think about it. He goes, wow, I'm going to have to get back to you. Can I come back to you tomorrow? Because that's going to take some work. It's not an obvious thing. And we did, and we shot the video, and it's ended up being one of the most popular videos of that topic for us because it is contrarian, right? And I think people have shared it, and I certainly know that he shared it. And it's not saying that we've got everything fixed or that we've done everything right, but it's just kind of going, okay, it's not as bad as we all think it is. There are some things we're doing well. And so that's an example of how you can be contrarian and actually get more lift to the video, the article, or the podcast that you're doing.
I know. I think when you translate that, say to LinkedIn, the people who are the sort of leaders, the thought leaders on LinkedIn, particularly in the marketing world, tend to be contrarians and provocateurs like Adam Robinson and Chris Walker. And I find myself, it's sort of like I don't like them. I don't, I find the way that they present themselves to be irritating. I think what they're saying is true. And I can't look away. Yeah, you have to provoke a reaction. I mean, that goes without saying. Colin, what are some of the other techniques and tricks that you use to create really good thought leadership?
I think it really comes down to the medium you use. Like in video, make sure you mix in some B-roll, right? It's not just talking heads if you're doing one, or have some B-roll ready to supply to the people you're doing interviews with. This is sort of like the equivalent of people making their logo available on your website, just in case someone's going to do a story on you. It'd be nice to go to the company website, click on a logo and go, I can download it, right? I can use the proper version, right-sized. The same thing. Why don't have some B-roll of your product or B-roll of your company headquarters, just so you can insert that into this news stories that we do. So those are things that I think you'll see a lot more of from companies in the future. But also just, kind of being, I'll call it video podcast ready. right? And this goes to just something that it's funny because I used to be on the other side of this. When I was, VP of marketing on the marketing side, I would be like, no one talk to the press. Like just no one's allowed to talk to the press unless it goes through the marketing team and the comms team, right? Like, and you understand why. But then the podcaster just happens to be strolling by the booth one day and they want to do an interview right then and there on maybe the new product launch. And all of a sudden the answer of everyone in the booth is, well, I can't talk to you. I got to go through communications. You're like, well, that's just ruined the moment. But that never happened before because that they would never have all the beat reporters for Forbes and whatever would have like lineups of people. So they never wandered. But in today's world, you have many forms of journalists and many forms of thought leaders that could help promote your company. So I've kind of now crossed the line to the other side and say, it shouldn't be centrally controlled. You shouldn't lock it down so much. Be ready, take advantage of opportunities when they do present themselves.
Well, be ready is the watchword, which means that you've got to have people who are trained because it's not easy. You used to think, I'm on Zoom all the time. How hard could it be to do a video? And then suddenly you find yourself, you're looking left, you're looking right. You never look at the camera. You the whole time. That's what I do. I'm still doing it. My poor editor is driving crazy. Lea, what's some of the things that you might have done that you would advise to anybody to sort of get a team ready so that you've got a group of people who can respond like that at a show or another event?
Well, I do think that this is, and I talk with people about this all the time, one of the most important things or one of the biggest values marketing can bring to any company is creating really strong alignment across the entire sort of ecosystem of the company. It used to be back 20 years ago, you could easily have marketing saying one thing over here, sales says something totally different in their sales interactions with someone, and then they get to onboarding and somebody's like, we don't do that. And it's like this totally disconnected process where everybody's saying something different. But today, almost everything is out there and people also interact with one another. People go to their peers, right? You have these situations where somebody just comes by your booth and wants to do an interview. It is critically important that everybody be really well aligned on clear messages and storylines and that you are providing good training and information, right? That there's lots of resources for them to tap into and lots of opportunity for them to read and see those messages in different formats, right? So making sure that anytime you do have an article or a podcast come out, it goes to the whole company. You encourage everybody to read or watch or those things so that people get really comfortable. Of course, with any of your subject matter experts, giving them any training that they need and preparing them for those bigger interviews and interactions and things like that. But I think having very clear messaging as a whole company, having very clear messaging for the campaigns you're doing, making sure it's distributed and everybody's educated and informed, that your sort of sales decks and marketing campaigns, everything is really well aligned. People get used to kind of the repetition of saying the same things is really, really important because I've been in that situation where, I'm talking to someone and I give the 60-second elevator pitch. And then the next person comes up, say to the booth, and the person next to me, who's a salesperson, says something completely different. And you're like, oh I can't believe they just said that's like totally off brand. That's not at all what we say. Like, what happened? And you realize like I should be doing a much better job of making sure everybody says the same thing.
Let's circle back on video because we've touched on this a number of times, but I know, Colin, you guys have gone all in on video. I thought what you did at HIMSS was great, having you had a relatively small footprint, but you had 2 video studios in the same footprint. It was remarkable. Tell us about how you've gone all in on video and what's some advice on how to make it work.
Yeah, well, this is a consequence of COVID, right? But during COVID, we essentially, as a publication, we started to embrace video. And during the time when we were all stuck at home, we decided consciously to go video first. So instead of the written word being our most prominent and the most featured piece, it would be the video. Now, we still embed our videos in an article, but we also have a YouTube channel. We also do clips on social media. So we've gone video first. And we've seen a rise in our readership, in our subscribers because of this. So we are tracking at a much higher rate than we were prior to COVID with just written words. So I can definitely say that video is preferred in terms of a medium for the distributing the stories that we tell. But I think in general, I think you just see like the rise of YouTubers, the rise of influencers, the rise of TikTok as platforms. You can see that from society's perspective, we're embracing video a lot more. And so, some of the tips for video is, I think we are just recognized we are not doing reviews of the latest Apple iPhone release, right? You're not going to get thousands and thousands of views of a video on the latest EHR, and enhancements. It's just not going to happen. So I think, first of all, I would say you just have to reset your expectations of none of us are really going to go viral here, right? It's really, there's no such thing in the B2B healthcare world or even the patient, marketing world. It just doesn't happen. And then because of that, I don't think you need to be as polished as some of the things you might see on YouTube. Like, it's okay. You can shoot it with your phone and have good quality audio, right? But you don't need the ultimate audio. It doesn't need to be processed 50 times to Sunday, right? You don't need the ultimate lighting. It's okay to be a little bit raw. And I think that lends to the authenticity that we talked about before. And it just takes practice. I look back at my first videos and I'm cringe. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't believe I was looking off camera. I can't believe I'm looking at the camera. I can't believe I'm doing this with my hands, that with my hands. But it just takes a bit of time to get used to having that camera there. And then you do get better at it. It's slow, it's painful, but you do get better at it. And I think that in terms of just starting out, that's, I would say, the advice I would give, and not to be too hung up on it doesn't look quite as polished as, let's say, a corporate video might be.
My first videos on LinkedIn looked like a hostage video, and they were worse than that because I was using some lighting and I decided to put a red filter on it. So it's just red. I mean, I looked like it's a hostage video.
I was looking back in some recently and I sort of thought, like, who let me get in front of the camera with that haircut? I mean, now I'm a lot more because it lasts forever. Those videos are on YouTube forever.
Yes, we all have our horror stories of our first video. That would be a great article or piece to do one day, right? Is to collect all of these and just go, here were the first videos from all these people. But yeah, I think all the other elements of storytelling apply in video. It's just shorter, right? And you don't have a lot of time to pull it off. It's usually a 5 to 15-minute video at most. So you don't have a lot of time to get your message across. And so you have to become very good at telling a story, or as an interviewer, getting out of the way a lot faster, right? So that your guest is the one that's being showcased rather than you. Yeah. So you just learn things as you go. And I think that's the key for me, that's the advice I give anyone. Just don't be afraid if you make a few mistakes. You will not like the first few videos you produce, and that's okay.
I feel that for marketers that, it's great to use an agency like us to create video. And we do quite a lot of video, but I think it's important that for marketers that they learn the skills to do that. So that if you're fortunate to have a team of 3 or 4 people, that somebody on that team, at least one person on that team, preferably more than one, is facile enough to do the kind of videos that you're doing. And as you say, if you got a decent iPhone, sort of maybe the top of the line iPhone with a decent mic, maybe a lighting source as well, you can do quite a lot. Also, to your point, you've got to also accept that it's going to be a bit more raw. I mean, we're having a conversation yesterday with a client about getting a demo video up, just a simple one. We just do a Loom video. Let's not overthink this. We'll help you script it, but just create a Loom video. It won't take you long. You'll do it in 10 minutes. And sure, it won't be sort of super polished, but it'll be good enough to tell a story. And you're not going to get dinged for the fact that it was done with Loom.
Yeah. And the other thing that we get asked a lot too, because we do a lot of short videos, right? These are videos that are like a minute long, 30 seconds long. People go, well, how do you get an executive to do that? Because it's very tough to do anything in 30 seconds. Like, you see how much work goes into a Super Bowl commercial, right? And all the prep and everything. And so they're always worried about that. And what I tell them is, well, what you don't see is the fact that clip came from a 20-minute interview, right? And so they were speaking for about 20 minutes, and it took until minute 18 where they were comfortable enough, where finally they let their guard down and something really good came out.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's what it takes. So the fact that you see a 30-second clip, it probably, at least in our world, it probably wasn't us turning on the camera and saying go, and they instantly put that out there, right? So I think some people put themselves under way too much pressure to be that soundbitey in like instantaneously. It
Yes.
takes a little bit of warm up and it takes a little time. And so, to your point, Adam, you may end up shooting 30 minutes of video to get the 4 1-minute clips that you need. And that's fine. Like we're not actually doing this on film these days. So there actually needs no cost, right? To how long you film anymore. So yeah, that's a question I get a lot of, like, how do you get these executives to say that's a really cool soundbite in 30 seconds? I'm like, well, because it's a 20-minute interview.
Yeah.
And
Right.
frankly, you might throw a lot of stuff away. I mean, I've done plenty of things where we had to redo something 10 times to get the 1-minute clip, right? It was a 1-minute clip, but you had to record it 10 times to get it in the 1 minute, right? And you toss out the rest, or you might try a bunch of different ones and toss them out, because once you actually get the person up there doing it, you realize that this is not great, right? We got to go back and redo this script, or we got to do that. You toss a lot of stuff out. There's very few people who just off the cuff can sort of do a thing like that. Does take some. It's okay to have mistakes and be human, but it often does take many tries to get the one that still is good enough.
It really does. And the big lift from a time standpoint is the editing. That always takes so much time. I mean, I enjoy doing it, so I'll play around with the script. But for doing the podcast, it's like I've got a guy an editor, I think he's Slovakian, but he's based in Ireland, and I've been working with him for about 2 years, and he's fantastic. Does great work, really turns it around quickly. But it'd be fun to do it myself, but I just don't have the time to do it. So, just to talk a bit about the role of research and thought leadership and data. So, I mean, Lea, how do you use, in the thought leadership that you've been involved with, how do you use research and data?
So I think this is always people ask me about this a lot, because people stress about the work that can be involved and the costs that can be involved. And, how do you do it if you're a smaller company or you don't have huge budgets? And because I so often talk about how valuable data is to storytelling, positioning yourself in a certain way, right? All these things. So I think the first thing is, it is really valuable and important. It doesn't necessarily have to be your data, right? A lot of times as a younger, newer company, you're looking at all the other data and information that is out there to help you craft your story and support what you're trying to say and support your messaging, right? So that's the first thing, is you don't always have to have your own data. You can certainly aggregate a lot of data from around, the healthcare, and create a great infographic or a great white paper, or weave it into your website for your storytelling. And then over time, as you have opportunities to gather additional data and information, whether that's through case studies, testimonials, surveys of your own clients, or digging into the data within, depending on what your software solution is, maybe digging into the data from your software, you can begin to kind of replace some of that with your own stuff. And eventually, ideally, maybe craft some kind of survey where you are trying to tell a more specific story, and the survey is broader, going out to your own customers, prospects, and other people in the industry. But even then, when you're doing a survey, there's a lot of different ways to do that and be able to get that information, right? Or if you're not ready to do a survey, maybe you're a member of Chime and you're taking advantage of the survey and focus group opportunities with Chime, or you're doing, polls on LinkedIn or something where you're gathering one question at a time and trying to get enough people just to be able to tell a story. But if you do want to do a real survey, you've got many options. You can do it yourself. You can do it with a third party. A lot of the publications we've been talking about now offer that as an option, right? And they'll help you promote it. They'll write the white paper. They'll do all the things. I think it is important, though, to go into your initial messaging, positioning, storytelling, knowing that this audience in healthcare, especially at the C-suite level, is looking for data that backs up your story, right? The data around why it's needed, what the challenges are, how you solve those challenges, proof that you solve those challenges the way you say you do. And you do need data for all those things. But you don't necessarily have to spend $50,000 on some huge survey and get 5,000 respondents and do all of that. There's a whole sort of spectrum of ways to get data into your storytelling. But I think today, more than ever, it's an incredibly critical part of all storytelling and thought leadership in healthcare.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, Leah mentioned that you don't have to do a comprehensive study. I mean, it's better if you can afford it, certainly do that. It lends you more credibility. The data will be picked up by more and more outlets.
Mhm.
But if 100 people respond to you on LinkedIn, if 50 people respond to your LinkedIn poll or your X poll or wherever you did it, that's valid. It may not be provable, but it's still what you got was a nice opinion. Like seems to be public sentiment on this topic. That still can make for great grist for a blog article, a great grist for a podcast episode to say, hey, we just did this informal poll and boy, like it came back and it surprised us, right, with this result. That's
Mhm.
great data. Now, and no one's going to base, future buying decisions off that piece of data, but it makes for great content. And then also, I think a lot of companies underestimate the data that they do have access to, their own audit logs, phone records of who's calling, why they're calling. You can even do studies on just the title of people that are calling into the support line. What is it? Are the executives calling? Is it the lower level folks? What kinds of questions are people asking when they're with you on the support lines and those kinds of things? How many times people log in? Do they log in the morning? Do they log in the afternoon? I mean, someone somewhere is going to find that data interesting, and there might be some insights that you could infer from some of this data. And I think a lot of vendors have that data. They just haven't looked at it in that light. So as much as we all love the survey that polled 1,000 doctors and got their opinion on whether they're going to adopt AI tomorrow, we can do other data elements and data things in order to do research to make your storytelling more compelling.
So last topic is, and we have to cover this topic, and is AI. Now, I know we've touched on it a bit, but Lea, how would you advise anybody listening this on how to balance the use of AI tools in developing thought leadership content?
So I think actually this is a perfect segue from the discussion about data, because there are so many AI tools that can help you with research, right?
Yes.
And I think honestly, and like what you were saying earlier about Notebook LM, there's Perplexity and you could use Chat Claude. There's all these solutions you can use. I do find it does save me a lot of time in terms of that initial research piece and gathering a lot of those data points or gathering insights people have shared about a certain topic. But I think we've all also learned you have to do that with a little bit of caution, because you still do get some hallucination kind of stuff in there, which has certainly happened to me. You do have to go check all those sources and make sure they're accurate. But I think it's a huge benefit when it comes to aggregating a lot of information, customer interview, like another place would be taking a bunch, like you were saying with Notebook LM, taking a bunch of customer interviews to pull out like the key insights from that. So there are definitely some amazing benefits that save you a lot of time that we used to all spend reading everything from scratch ourselves, right? Trying to pull all that together from scratch ourselves, doing all the research. There then is this transition, I think, though, where you do need to be sort of cautious. People can mostly tell when you're using it to do the actual writing or storytelling. You do need to be sort of careful there and use it more as a support tool, I think. Even if you did say, create the initial version of this for me using this outline and these data points, you want to be very specific about, I'm trying to tell the story this way, and I want it to be outlined like this, and I want to use these things. And then you do have to go back through and kind of edit and redo, right, to get it into the right voice and make sure the story really flows and is aligned. So I think of it more as a companion and a helper than the thing that actually does the work. I think you have to be really cautious about using it to do the work for you, because people can often tell when you use, and like you were saying about the podcast earlier, often very inauthentic, and that's an issue.
What I've also heard a few people say is that Google can tell
Yes.
whether you're using AI to write an article, and they could actually, it actually is more sensitive than a human is
Yeah.
that. And I think the LLMs like Claude, which I think is good for writing, have got better at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you still have to be careful. Colin, what's your perspective on that?
It's evolved and it continues to evolve. I would recommend people, you totally need to lean into AI. Don't be afraid of it. Use it the way you feel comfortable, because it's here. I think we're going to be talking about AI like we talk about spreadsheets today. No one blinks an eye that you're using a spreadsheet. No one thinks you're less accounting capable because you use a spreadsheet versus a calculator. So I think eventually some people are going to go like, yes, you should totally use an AI to generate a video. Like, why would you not? Or why would you not use an AI to pull out the salient points out of a 1-hour meeting that it recorded? Like today, it might sound weird or strange, or maybe some people may have some problems with it. But I think over time, you're like, I think you look at someone funny going, you didn't use those tools. So I like to look at it. I recommend that you just look at the use of AI in sort of risk categories, right? So low risk is, yeah, totally use AI to extract something from a recording. Why wouldn't you? You could probably pick up things that you don't pick up. So you totally use that. Totally, you should use it to generate recipe ideas and ideas for a party, or even if you're organizing an event, why not ask and get the best practices from around the world that you probably don't know who to ask of, and those kinds of things. As Lea put it, to generate your first few ideas for the kernel of an article or a video, why not? But the risk increases as you put AI more and more as a surrogate for yourself, right? So when you get to the point of, okay, have it write everything for you and you just publish it without ever looking at it, like that's to me very high risk to your reputation, high risk to your brand. So I wouldn't maybe recommend that level, right? But anything below that, I think it's really dependent on the role you have, why you're using it. And I say lean in, find ways to leverage the tools. I have no problem, to your point earlier, Adam, if someone generates an entirely AI generated video because they're like a 2-person company with an innovative product, I'd rather have them use an AI to generate that video than waste all the time trying to fundraise $16,000 to go pay someone professionally to make it. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. So, but on the flip side, if you're like someone like Philips, right? I'm pretty sure they're not using AI to generate the latest demo video of their latest CT scanner, right? Like, because you're Philips, like you shouldn't be doing that. It's too much of a risk to your reputation. So I think it's all relative. So I say lean in.
So closing question for both of you, and I'll come to Lea first and then you, Colin, which is, what's the single most important piece of advice for health tech marketers looking at ways to improve their thought leadership?
I would say the single most important piece of advice is to, whatever it is you say you're doing, that's what you should deliver. So a lot of times people will try to maybe get their demo out there by framing it like it's thought leadership or it's education. And then you get there and it's actually a demo. And then people think you're not trustworthy, right? So I think the most important thing is whatever you're saying you're doing, that is what you should be doing. And if you're saying it's educational, it's thought leadership, it's insights, it's opinion, that should be what it is.
Yeah. Right. Don't use it as a kind of a tricksy bait and switch.
Yeah, don't try to be tricky. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the summary. Don't try to be tricky.
Well, it completely destroys trust.
Yeah.
Colin, how about you?
Yeah, I think the advice, other than just get out there and do it, it would be to align whoever it is that you're putting out there as your thought leader, align their thought leadership with who they are as a person. And what I mean by that is a lot of CEOs try to be healthcare advocates, but you can tell from what they're saying, their heart's not in it, right? Are they, but maybe they're very passionate about business building, and that's okay. Put them out there as a passionate business builder. It just happens to be in healthcare, right? Rather than try to position them as, let's say, a patient advocate or like an advocate for lower fees from reimbursements, right? Like it can ring so hollow when the heart is not in it. So I would say take the time to align the thought leadership with the person. And so there you have to make the choice. Do you want the person more than you want the message? Because if it's critical you have a CEO out there, then maybe they won't talk about patient advocacy, and that's okay. Or is it more important you have the message out there, in which case you got to find someone internally who has that burning flame inside them that matches that message you want, because that will make the bigger difference.
I think that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah.
Well, Lea and Colin, thank you so much for being on the show today. This has been a great discussion. It's been one of the longest episodes we've done. That's because I think I've just enjoyed the conversation so much. So thank you both to you for being on the show.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was awesome.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that episode. And, as ever, we'll be taking what we heard in that episode and writing a detailed, actionable article on the topic of thought leadership. And that'll be published as a blog post and also as a LinkedIn article. So look out for that. And there should be a link down below in the show notes. Here's some takeaways, things that I'm thinking about having listening to that. So number 1, double down on video. Number 2, the line between paid and earned is blurring. So pay for play is okay, but the source means trust. So you got to be careful who you're doing your pay to play with, because there are sources like Sway Health and Hims and pay for play sources like Becker's that are really trusted. So you've got to be careful about who you're doing this with. The other thing was the notion of being contrarian. I really like that point of view from Colin. It is important to provoke a reaction, right? Don't be too samey in your thought leadership. And last but not least, the point about AI is you're kind of behind if you're not using it, but use it carefully. You have to be the editor of authenticity. It's up to you to make sure that your content comes across as genuine and thoughtful. Just a closing thought for you. My firm, Health Launchpad, specializes in helping healthcare technology companies grow their business. And we want to be a resource to the community. And so if you've got a problem that you're dealing with, or something that you kind of want to get an objective viewpoint, I'd really welcome having a call with you just to kind of talk through the challenges that you're facing and see if I can provide any ideas or any advice. There's nothing for sale here. It's just an opportunity to chat with an objective third party. If you like the show and this is the first time you're listening, do subscribe. You can subscribe on any of the audio podcast applications. And we also have a YouTube channel, so you can subscribe there. And do click the links below. You'll see that there are articles that are actionable things that you can use to improve your thought leadership content. So with that, I will bid you farewell and look forward to seeing you on future episodes.